Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by Golden Wings Horseshoes and produced by Cowboy Spirit Radio Network. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist John Branch has always been a fan of rodeos. So when the New York Times assigned him a story about a Utah family entrenched in the rodeo circuit, John was all in. His story eventually turned into the book, The Last Cowboys. John joins our cowboys to talk about ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Well, Alan, I'm sitting on my wife's horse in Tombstone, Arizona, at Tombstone Monument Ranch, just about to, I can't hardly hear myself because the cows are screaming because they're sorting and counting. And then we're going to, along with 14 guests, push the cows. This is the culmination of the roundup. We're going to drive the cows to the west end of the ranch. It's about 8-9 miles. And, 5-year-old Reagan's going to ride along with me. We figured it's time she drove some cattle at 5.
Well, I wish I was there with you.
We do too. I wish you were here too, because last time you were here, you were pretty stunned by how bad the ranch looked. And you know, it's nothing like 2 years of good rain and Criollo cattle to put the grass back on the ranch. And we're just really excited about it.
Well, I'd love to be there if I could.
Well, next time.
Yeah.
So anyway, of course, and it is truly coincidental, we've got a guest today who's written a bit about cattle ranching. John Branch is with us. He's a San Francisco-based sports reporter for the New York Times. He's the author of The Last Cowboys, a pioneer family in the New West. And this is about a family of bronc riding rodeo champions. And, you know, bronc riders are not always ranch cowboys, so this is not always the case. John is a reporter without a beat. He writes about a little bit of everything, I guess, from the Olympics. He's done that many times. Dog grooming contests, only once for that. He's occasionally done different sections of the paper. His quest is to write the stories that surprise his readers. I guess it's said usually nibbling in the shadows of the sports world. His newest book, sorry about my voice, Sidecountry, is a riveting compilation of his favorite works. John received the 2013 Pulitzer Prize for feature writing with his Snowfall. And Snowfall is a story about a deadly avalanche in Washington. He was a finalist for the same prize the year before for a series about hockey enforcer Derek Bugard, if I get that right. I apologize, hockey fans, if I didn't. The subject of his first book, Boy on Ice, The Life and Death of Derek Bugard, winner of the ESPN PEN Award for Literary Sports Writing. John was raised in Golden, Colorado, one-time manager for Costco, and received his master's degree in journalism from the University of Colorado at Boulder. And in 2005, left Costco somehow and went to New York Times. It's really good to have you, John.
Wow, that was quite an introduction. Do we still have time to talk?
I'm impressed with the introduction. Let's just stay with that.
Did I get it right?
Yeah, it all sounds good to me. Thanks for that. No, honored to be here with you guys. Thanks so much.
Well, I'm interested in your The Last Cowboy book. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. The Last Cowboys is a book about the Wright family from Utah. Any of your listeners who are rodeo fans probably know who the Wrights are. They are.
How many brothers? 6?
Well, yeah, there's 7 brothers, but now there's a second generation.
Wow.
So Cody, who's the oldest of the 7 brothers, is a 2-time world champion. He's got 4 boys now, and the 4th of them just turned pro. So he's got 4 of them on the circuit, plus some of Cody's brothers. So you have these uncles and these boys that are all over the place, zigzagging around the West to rodeos. They were just here in California recently during the California swing, and so now they're moving up to Oregon and every place else that has rodeos all through the summer.
Do they pretty well go as a team?
Yeah, you know what? They generally travel in 4s in their trucks and their campers, and so they're usually about 2 teams of Wrights running around.
Is Cody still riding?
Cody's not. He's officially retired. Just got named to the Utah Sports Hall of Fame just earlier this year. So he's I'm trying to think of how old he is. He must be 43, something like that. So he's trying to work the ranch with his dad, Bill, and so that the story of the Last Cowboys is really about both rodeo and ranching, and the challenges that they face rodeoing and staying healthy, and just the miles and miles that they put on cars just to go chase maybe a paycheck, not usually a paycheck, but sometimes a paycheck, and trying to make it through 100 rodeos every year and try to get to NFR, where the real money is, in Las Vegas every December. Cody's boys are now all in their early 20s. They're 18 to 25 or so. When they were just starting out, Cody was traveling with them to kind of show them the ropes, and now they're on their own doing it with their uncles, with Cody's younger brothers. But the other half of the book really is about their ranching prospects, and so the patriarch of the family is Bill Wright, and they have some land. They're from Milford, Utah, but they have some land down right outside of Zion National Park, right outside of Virgin or Hurricane, if you folks know where that is. Beautiful land that's been in the family for 150 years. Wow. And they run cattle there. And so the story of why it's called the Last Cowboys is that these guys are trying to hang on to this land the best they can as the world kind of closes in on them. That whole St. George area and Zion area has gotten so popular that they're wondering whether it even makes sense to keep running cattle where they are, or if it's better to sell off, 150 years of tradition and pack it up and try to move somewhere else. So wow. That's really the heart of the story.
That's a decision that a whole lot of ranchers face, and not really if you love the lifestyle, it's hard to walk away from that.
Yeah, and the Wrights are still struggling with it. The book doesn't really ever conclude. I don't want to. I hope people will read it, but if they get to the end, they'll realize that it's still kind of up in the air. And even now, a couple of years after it's published, it's still up in the air. They're still running cattle there. They're still a little unsure about what the future holds for them.
And what, John, what took you to the Wrights? How did that happen?
Yeah, I was working at the Fresno Bee. I was a sports columnist in Fresno, California, and my editor there was a guy named Charlie Waters, who passed away about 5 years ago. But about 20 years ago, Charlie was the guy who hired me in Fresno, and he was an old cowboy. He was from Kingman, Arizona. Had bounced around newspapers all around the West, and he loved rodeo, and so he followed the rodeo circuit. And after I left the Fresno Bee and I was working at the New York Times, I stayed in touch with Charlie, and one day he told me, or asked me, he goes, "Do you know about the Wright boys?" And I said, "No, not really." And he said, "Well, I think there's maybe a cool story there." And he had a connection through his wife to Milford, Utah, where the Wrights were from. So he had been through there before. And he said, these guys are dominating the saddle bronc. Saddle bronc is, as far as a true cowboy like Charlie was, as far as he was concerned, that was the ultimate rodeo event, the original rodeo event. And he thought there might be a story about all these brothers that were dominating the saddle bronc circuit and maybe visiting them on their ranch. And so I eventually pitched that to my bosses at the New York Times and wrote that as a story for the New York Times. And the second it published, it was a big, long story, a book publisher who had published my first book called me and said, "Do you want to turn that into a book?" And I said, "Yeah. I mean, if you're asking me if I want to spend more time with the Wrights and on the rodeo circuit, hanging around the ranch to write a book out of it, yes, please." And so I spent more time, and a couple years later wrote the book.
Interesting. Those two worlds don't always overlap as much as logic would suggest. I went to a rural high school, and two of the the kids I went to school with became pretty decent local level bull riders. Yeah. And I don't think either one of them could have identified a bull from a heifer. And the guys I grew up with that were off the ranches, they maybe did a little team roping, but they sure weren't bronc or bull riders. They didn't do the rough stock stuff. And so it's not always an overlap. I always tell our guests at the rodeo, our little ranch rodeo where we don't do rough stock, I always say the 3 events in rodeo that really spring almost directly from real ranch work was saddle bronc riding, team roping, and what they now call tie-down roping. And that one's a little bit, obviously, is not one person jumping off a horse in the middle of the Brandon pen, but those are the events. So it's really interesting that you found these guys who are trying to keep the ranch going and are huge names to rodeo fans, not of course, rodeo. I asked people who's heard of Trevor Brazil at our ranch, and of course I don't even remember how many world championships he's won, and no one's heard of him, so it just kind of makes a difference that rodeo is still sort of a niche sport.
Yeah, niche of its own for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things I hope this book did and does is really highlight these guys and the women, just because it is a niche sport, and even people who go to their local rodeo, which maybe comes through once a year, they're not really paying attention to the personalities, but spending time with these guys. And I have, in previous jobs, written a few rodeo stories, and I've always been fascinated by it, because these people are spending so much time on the road. And unlike most of the athletes that I cover on a day-to-day basis, in the NBA or in professional golf or anywhere else, these guys have no guarantees, right? They're going to get in a truck and they're going to drive sometimes 800 miles overnight to get to a rodeo the next day for a chance to ride for 8 seconds. And if they don't get hurt, but also don't make it 8 seconds or don't get judged high enough, they're going to walk away with 0. And if they do win something, it might be $1,000, might be a couple $1,000, pay for gas money and some food, and they might make a little bit of a living out of it. But you have to do that dozens and dozens of times. Most of these guys are going to 80 or 100 rodeos a year. And that slog just fascinates me. I mean, talk about having to love it, to throw yourself into this very dangerous and non-guaranteed lifestyle. I just thought it was fascinating. So, a good chunk of the book really sort of tries to bring readers into their truck with them to the rodeo behind the chutes with these guys.
Well, that's fantastic. Just, I can't imagine, you probably know, but you can probably guess. What was Cody Wright's biggest year, including the NFR, money-wise?
Yeah, I should know off the top of my head, but it was probably 200,000.
Yeah, right.
They're also driving 100,000 miles. I mean, I always say this, like they probably need $60,000 or $70,000 just in expenses, because they're driving, these big rigs, big trucks, 100,000 miles, that much in a year sometimes, which is also
easy.
Tires. So they're spending a lot of money just to get places. But yeah, a couple $100,000. He's got 4 kids now who are now all doing really, really well, and one of them, the third of them, named Stetson Wright, is the only one of the Wrights, the first one of the Wrights who decided to stick it out with bull riding and bronc riding. And so he is now a world champion bronc and a world champion bull rider. He has now been a 2 or 3 time all-around champion. You talked about Trevor Brazil. He's basically the first rough stock all-around since Ty Murray, which is taking you back to the early 90s.
That's quite a record.
Yeah, so Stetson Wright is riding bulls, and he is making, because he's doing both those events and dominating both those events, he's making $500,000 or $600,000 a year after NFR. So he's setting records with that kind of money. That's a good weekend for a professional golfer.
Or how much of a game would an NBA player have to play to make $500,000?
Exactly. LeBron James probably makes that every game. I don't even know. But
I bet he does.
Yeah, these guys are putting in a lot of time and effort and risk in chasing it. But it's what they love to do. And to your point about, the ranch lifestyle, I think saddle bronc riders and, as you mentioned, the ropers, I've been on their ranch and they're doing these kinds of things on a daily basis. So this is part of their lives, both in the truck and at the rodeos, but also when nobody's watching.
Are they still connected with the ranch real strong?
Yeah, so Bill still has, they've got two areas. They've got a winter range and summer range. Most of it's leased, but they have a summer range up outside of Beaver, Utah, up in the mountains. And then in the winter, they're down by Zion National Park. And they lease some of that land, but they also own, 900 and some acres, 720 acres maybe, right on the doorstep of Zion, on the west side of Zion. And so they're still running cattle there. I imagine, I haven't talked to them recently, but it's that time of year where they're doing their own roundup and their own branding, and they'll move those cattle, usually in May, up to the beaver land up in the mountains.
It's kind of hard to keep the ranch going and stay on the road a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, Bill's got it taken care of, and Cody now is his right-hand man. Out of those 7 brothers, Bill and Evelyn had 7 boys and 6 girls. They had 13 kids. But of those 7 brothers, Cody is basically Bill's right-hand man. He's got a couple of other sons that are not still on the rodeo circuit and help out some too. So they've got some help, but Bill's been doing this for a long time, so he loves to go out there and be on horseback. Russell, when you were talking about being on your horse just now, it made me think about something Bill Wright always told me, and that was, a bad day on horseback will beat a good day just about anywhere else. And, you just like going out and running around and pushing cows around.
All right, so we better take a break and. Alan, you and I talk about horseshoeing. We have that in common, and I still shoe horses. And yesterday I brought up a horse, and I won't use his name because people who ride him, I'm not sure I want him to know this, but he was living at another one of our dude ranches, and they called us up and they said, we think this horse needs to be euthanized. And he can't hold weight, but he's just chronically lame, and we can't fix it, and we need to send him off to heaven. And so my wife did what she does. She went and got him, and she said, well, we'll make our own analysis. And first thing she said is, Russell, put some golden wings on this guy. He needs some concussion relief, and he's got too small a feet on too big a body, and we're going to fix him with some golden wings, and we're going to give him some pre-chewed food and some high calories. We'll put some weight on him. And so I shot him again yesterday, put the golden wings on him, and his feet were a little short, and I was a little concerned, and so I made him trot out, and he trotted out 100% sound with those brand new golden wings on. It's all he's had since he got here, and the only problem we have with him is he runs a little too fast for some of our guests to handle.
That's a different problem.
So that's a different problem.
John, you clearly, you were in Fresno and you worked for the Cowboy publisher, and so this isn't, you're not a wide-eyed dude, so to speak. You got a sense of this stuff. Was there something about this 3-year experience with the Wrights that surprised you the most?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. One is just how much sacrifice they made to make this happen. Not everybody can go away, mostly on weekends, but, driving overnight and spending a few days each week chasing rodeos and making a career out of it. If you want to make a career out of it, you're probably going to have to get to NFR every year, which means you're going to have to be in the top 15. And to do that, you're going to have to go to 70, 80 or more rodeos. That's a huge burden, not just on mostly the men who are doing this, but certainly on the families and the women back home raising kids and trying to keep homes going. You really, really have to want to do this and have a lot of support back home to make it happen. And so I think I was surprised by just the sacrifice of it all. When it comes to the ranching, I think what surprises me, I live in California. I work for the New York Times. I grew up in Colorado, but I'm very familiar with, this notion of flyover country. I fly over the country quite a bit. And I look out the window and I look down. I'm flying over Utah all the time. And I'm looking down at Utah and just what looks like all these empty spaces across the country, especially across the West. And I know this to be true, but I think this book really made me realize it, makes me think about it in different ways. When I look down at the country from 30,000 feet, I think about all the nooks and crannies of all the people just trying to make a living, pushing cattle around, trying to raise cattle, raise crops, doing very quiet, anonymous work in the little folds of the country. And it just really makes me think and appreciate, all the hard work that people go through just to try to make a living and make ends meet. And the Wrights are certainly one of them, but they are one of a million of them down there. And I hope this book sort of reflects, that lifestyle.
So I lived that lifestyle for a lot of years, and when you're living it, you kind of wonder why anybody else would do anything but that. It's addictive. But when you look at it from a different perspective, you wonder why somebody would be drawn to that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't wonder why people do it, because there's part of it which is I was more adept on a horse and had the wherewithal to do it, or had family that had, property or a farm or a ranch. There's a part of me, and I'm sure I'm not alone, that thinks, boy, it'd be nice to, settle into those nooks and crannies a little bit and just be really close to the land, to family, and appreciate those kinds of values.
Do you think, as a person who lives in California, writes for the New York Times, and just by the nature of your work, associate with people who do similar things,
mm-hmm.
do you feel that your understanding is nearly unique among your culture?
I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think that my background, I grew up in a small town in Colorado. I'd like to think that, when I'm with the Wrights, I'm kind of with my people, even though maybe people look at me as a, New York Times reporter and have some sort of image of what that might mean or represent. I think as soon as people sit down and meet me, they realize I'm just a goofy dude from Colorado and nothing more than that. And so, most of the stories I do I tend to do a lot in small towns. I do a lot around the West. And I think it's just where I'm comfortable. That's what I grew up with.
Well, I was asking you something different. I must have not phrased it right, because you get it. And do you feel like other people at the New York Times, or if you live in urban California, do they have any grasp of flyover country and these ranchers?
I think it's a good question. I think one of the things that people worry about, and I know we talk about it at the Times, is, are we representing this country in really the world, but this country, by the people we have in the newsroom, by the people that we send out to do these kinds of stories? Are we representative in terms of where people are from and, the geography, but also diversity and men and women? And I think we are aware of that and are always striving to do a better job of that. We have a national desk at the New York Times that has people all over the country. So we have people in Phoenix and in Denver and all sorts of people in California. It's always tricky when you basically go from, say, California to go do a story in a small town in Montana. And people are like wondering and kind of giving you the side eye, like, who are you? And do you even know what it's like here? And, what big city are you from? That's always going to be an issue. But I think the Times does a really good job of understanding that it's an issue and that we need to be living more and more and being more and more in these places to give us, that genuine sense of what it's really like, not just parachuting in now and again.
Well, and I've quoted this several times. I was at a Dude Ranch convention years ago, and the governor of Wyoming, we were in Wyoming, and the governor of Wyoming, oddly enough, for that state was a Democrat, and he kind of laughed. He said, a lot of you guys might not be Democrats, but he said, I think this country is less about Republicans and Democrats and more about urban versus rural. And I think that that's probably more true than a lot of people appreciate. And books like yours maybe help bridge that divide a little.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope so. And it's funny because people say this, Russell, about California too, right? California has a reputation as being a coastal state and a very blue state. Well, I can look out my window and see a neighbor with a big Trump flag flying from his house. Sure. And all I have to do is go, a few miles inland, and, California is not so much divided north and south. We always talk about Northern California and Southern California, but it's very east or west. It's very blue, if you want to paint it blue, along the coast, and then very red inland. I worked in Fresno, which is in the middle of the Central Valley. Very red country. And so, yeah, we know that these lines are not as distinct as red and blue the way everybody likes to paint them. And I think you don't have to go very far, no matter where you are in this country, to find that it's actually a purple. And I think to your point earlier is like we're so much more alike than people will tell you, and that people paint us to be. And in my own neighborhood here in very blue part of California, it doesn't take me very long to go find a lot of red. So
Yeah, but well, I'm in Cochise County, Arizona right now, so it would be
great to find some blue.
it might be a little bit tricky there. Tucson, very different, very blue, yep. very much. Your newest book is Sidecountry. How did that happen?
Yes, Sidecountry is the easiest book I'll ever write because it's a compilation of my favorite stories from the New York Times that I've written. So the publisher said, let's just do it's not a greatest hits. That sounds like I have an ego or something, like I would have a greatest hits. But he said, let's put together some of your favorite stories. Most of them are outdoorsy kinds of stories. You mentioned Snowfall, which is a story about a deadly avalanche in Washington. A long story, but there's a bit of everything. There's a story about, and they're all off the beaten path, exactly what we've been talking about. There's a story, for example, about trying to pull the dead bodies off of the top of Mount Everest. That's one of the few far-flung ones. Most of them are in small towns across this country. One of my favorites, for example, is about Alan Francis, who is the most dominant athlete I've ever known. And you guys have probably never heard of Alan Francis, I'm guessing?
No.
Alan Francis lives in Defiance, Ohio, and he has won, and I don't know exactly the number, but it's probably about 26 or 27 world championships in horseshoes. He dominates the sport of horseshoes.
Okay.
And so that's one of my favorite stories was hanging out with Alan Francis. There's a couple of other stories. There's a story out of Michigan that I did a few years ago that has always been one of my favorites, even though it's really sad. And that's about a man named Don Doan who lived in a small town in Michigan and bowled every week with his buddies. And finally, at the age of 64, he bowled his first 300 game of his life. And before he stepped off the lane, he had a heart attack and died.
Oh, goodness.
Wow. So I went back there for his service, which was at the bowling alley, and met all of his friends. And they talked about the very quiet life of this man who basically died at the pinnacle of joy.
Died at his favorite moment.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, certainly a horrible story, but I guess if you were to try to script the end of your own life, maybe that's not the worst way to go.
Huh.
And there are a couple personal stories. There's one about that I wrote for the New York Times about Rubik's Cubes, which I realize is not really a sport, but my son got into Rubik's Cubes. My son has had some social issues, ADHD. I'm sure a lot of folks and families are struggling with kids, that maybe have been placed on the spectrum. And so my son got into Rubik's Cubes and found kind of his friends through Rubik's Cubes. And we went to a couple of national competitions for Rubik's Cubes. And so that's one of my favorite stories that's in there. And another one was in the wake of the mass shooting in Las Vegas at the Mandalay Bay. I went and covered that. And the moment I got to Las Vegas to cover that mass shooting, where I believe 56 people were killed, I realized that one of the people killed was somebody that I knew back home here in California.
Oh, goodness.
Was the mother of one of my daughter's friends. And so that's a personal essay that's in there that actually ends the book. So it's got a little bit of everything. You'll laugh, you'll cry, all that. But I'm really proud of the work that's in there.
Well,
it is the greatest hits, and that's terrific. I want to read it. I haven't yet. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
But I want to, and I also hope you'll make it to Tucson, and it just would be an honor to meet you. And we'll have to figure out a story to drag you out to Arizona so Alan and I see.
Do you ever come to Tucson? Do you ever come to Tucson?
Yeah, I love Tucson. In fact, I've been to the book festival there 3 times. They've been gracious enough to invite me for each of the 3 books I've written. So,
great.
I'm not sure when my next book will be or if it'll be, but the incentive for me to get a 4th book is so that I can come to Tucson because I just love it.
Well, when you're
you
here,
got one without
let
it.
us know and we'll have you on the program again. We'd love to.
I would love it.
Yeah.
I would absolutely love it.
Well, I'm a dude rancher, and we have dude ranches in Arizona, but where I live and kind of the mothership of our little effort is White Stallion outside Tucson, and we'll have to get you there. What are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on another sort of climbing adventure story for the New York Times, which is a story about a climbing disaster on the tallest mountain outside of Asia, which is Aconcagua in Argentina. And there was a climbing disaster there about 50 years ago. And not too long ago, in the glacier where these people died, a camera was found with film in it. And so we have rescued that camera and film, and we're writing the story about what it says about what happened that day and that week, and about who the people were that were involved.
Well, I'd like to read that.
Yeah, it'll take a few months, but hopefully by the end of the year we'll have that all put together.
Wow, that's like a fiction story that was well crafted. That's an exciting find and a great story. So
I'm a big believer that life is interesting enough. I'm a nonfiction fan. So,
yeah, me too.
Yeah,
there's good stories all around us.
Me too. Well, where do people? Obviously Amazon and all the book sources. Can people, if they've forgotten names, or can they go to a website and learn more about your books and your writing?
Well, you can probably just Google me, and you'll probably get taken to my bio at the New York Times and nytimes.com.
Right.
Page there that has my writing on it, my most recent writing, which isn't a lot lately. And then, any bookstore. I mean, even your local little bookstore can order any of these. So if Amazon's your only option, great. But I always say support your local bookstores because they could use the love.
Well, that's everybody we bring on says the same. And they also say that when those orders happen, usually the small bookstore will order a couple extras. So it gets the word out a little bit. So. Yeah.
Well, John, it's been really good to talk to you, and I'm glad we arranged this.
I am really super glad we arranged this. Alan Russell, thank you. This is really great. It really is an honor, and I'm thrilled if anybody read The Last Cowboys. Thrilled that it did well, and that people seem to enjoy it. So I hope your listeners give it a try and enjoy it themselves.
Well, we are literally, my 5-year-old Reagan and I are really literally just this moment ride and drag behind 120 some cattle as we head out of the corrals. So the timing is perfect, and this was really fun. Thank you very much, John Branch.
I wish I was there with you. I think you're right. I think it's obvious. You're having the best day of all of us.
Thanks, John.
I think I might be. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap from the White Stallion Dude Ranch in Arizona, where rodeos happen weekly. A shout out to Stan Husted's production team. Did you know we're on Instagram and Facebook? Give us a look. Give us a like. Next week, talk turns to trash, as in garbage, as in a conversation with Edward Humes about his new book, Total Garbage, How We Can Fix Our Waste and Heal Our World. Until we meet again, this is Lynn Weezy Sneed reminding you to sit tall, ride safe, and enjoy this week's song, Cowboy's Sweetheart, performed by the talented Tucsonan Bethany Zill.